As the waters calm in Paris, the ripples of a doping controversy continue to spread. The United States has cast a shadow over Chinese swimmers, raising yet unproven allegations of doping.
Although the Olympic Games have drawn to a close, a scandal is still brewing, one that could potentially jeopardize the integrity of international sports. The heart of this controversy lies in the contrasting outcomes for athletes who tested positive for banned substances.
But now, new questions are surfacing about the integrity of U.S. athletes and their own alleged use of banned substances. What is the U.S. really aiming for by targeting its strongest competitor? What lies behind the doping issues at home that the country seems eager to conceal? And as we look ahead to the Games in Los Angeles 4 years from now, can we truly trust what we see? Today on Deep Dive, CGTN Radio reporter Xu Yawen, who has been closely following this unfolding scandal, joins us to unravel the truth behind the U.S. doping narrative. This episode is brought to you on Friday, August 16th, 2024. Yawen, how were the Chinese swimming team treated differently during the Paris Olympics?
Well, there has been unfair testing and biased accusations against the Chinese athletes before the Olympics, during the Olympics, and after they won the gold medals. So let me starting with, since July 1st, 2024, the Chinese swimming team competing in Paris have been tested an average of 21 times by various doping agencies from various countries. In comparison, the U.S. swimmers have been tested only 6 times each, and Australian swimmers have been tested even less, 4 times each. And during the game, we have also noticed that the Chinese swimmers they were tested for doping around 200 times in total over 10 days period after they arrived in Paris for the Games, almost 4 times as much as their U.S. counterparts. So the frequently and also the very high intensive testing on Chinese swimming teams have caused, I'll say, some have impact their performances on certain level. Because they were their tests were started at 5 a.m. in the morning and ending at midnight. Obviously affected any athlete's sleeping time, right? So, however, despite unfair testing and accusations, Chinese swimmers Pan Zhanle, he won the gold medal and broke the world record in a 100-meter freestyle during the Olympic Games.
Yes.
He finished a whole second ahead of Australia's Kyle Karmos and also Romania's David Popovic. They each won the silver and the bronze medal. So instead of being praised and viewed as sports icon, some Western medias were questioning why Chinese swimmers could break the world record and swim so fast. I think that's a very obvious unfair accusation and also very biased reporting when it comes to Chinese team.
As you said, the unfair treatment started before the Paris Olympics started. How did the Western reports target Chinese swimmers this year?
Well, the event all started with some Western mainstream media like New York Times reported that concerns over food contamination case involving 23 Chinese swimmers in 2021. So China's ADA, China's anti-doping agency, responded in July this year saying that they did investigations and followed the protocol. It also reported the case to WADA, the World Anti-Doping Agency, and WA, the World Aquatics, is like how China was handling the case, and the procedure has been recognized by both WADA and WA, and actually in accordance with the relevant provisions of the anti-doping rules and the World Anti-Doping Code, in order to protect athletes' legitimate rights and interests, cases where no doping violation is found will not have their outcomes made public. But we still see that New York Times spin the narrative that China's ADA and the World Anti-Doping Agency are, quote, covering up the truth. And then we saw on July 5th the U.S. government has opened a criminal investigation into this so-called doping case against the Chinese swimmers. However, a week later, Swiss independent prosecutor Eric Cotier, he submitted a report showed that the WADA was impartial in handling the incident of Chinese swimmers tested positive for the food contamination. In the meantime, WADA's president, Victor Banca, says the U.S. accusations against Chinese athletes are politically motivated and based on anti-China bias. And he said the U.S. anti-doping authorities are more concerned with policing foreign sports events than their own. And then we noticed that the U.S. government threatened to cut its funding for WADA unless it enacts reforms, which many believe that WADA has to side with the U.S. instead of remaining impartial.
So WADA has made its stance clear, but the West, especially the U.S., didn't buy it. But I'm quite curious because the food contamination incident was in 2021. That was 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Why did the Western media bring it up all of a sudden this April?
Very interesting. If you look at the timeline, the Chinese swimming team was participating in the Paris Olympic trials back in April. And many believe that U.S. hoped to influence the Chinese swimming team from the beginning of the selection. I mean, after the selection, the Chinese swimming teams entered a closed training camp. It was also from this time that the frequency of testing on China's team increased further. If you look it up, like during the nearly 3 months of training, Zhang Yufei, the female Chinese swimmers, and 6 other swimmers were tested more than 25 times. In contrast, the average number of tests per person for American swimmers in the first half of 2024 was only 6 times. So according to the response from the International Testing Agency, it said that it was indeed the media reports on Chinese swimming team that lead to additional testing of Chinese swimmers before the Olympics. So many suggest that if the U.S. team, they think they cannot beat Chinese swimmers fairly, they use testing as the ploy to unsettle China's team.
Then how has the hyping up action progressed till the Paris Olympics?
After New York Times biased reporting on Chinese swimming team in April, we have noticed that in late May, the U.S. House of Representatives asked its Justice Department and FBI to investigate on this so-called Chinese athletes testing positive for drugs. And then on June 25th, at the congressional hearing, figures like former Olympic swimmers Michael Phelps voiced their lack of confidence in WADA. And then by early July, the World Swimming Federation confirmed that the U.S. had launched a criminal investigation into the matter, as I briefly just touched upon. Then the time comes to late July. On July 24th, WADA president criticized the U.S. for making baseless accusations against the Chinese athletes and claiming they were motivated by political bias and anti-China sentiments. On the same day, Salt Lake City in Utah of America was awarded the 2034 Winter Olympics. And then the International Olympic Committee has a special rule that U.S. authorities must respect WADA's authority in anti-doping efforts, or the hosting rights could be revoked. And in the meantime, the Chinese anti-doping agency issued a statement strongly urging U.S. anti-doping agency to stop fabricating false narratives and engaging in political manipulation, and also to cease disrupting and undermining the global anti-doping order and global governance, the governance systems, as well as using the so-called legal measures by the U.S. to threaten and also, put more pressure on Chinese athletes. However, we have noticed that American politicians escalated the situation by the end of July by proposing this so-called Restore Confidence in WADA Act, which plans to grant the U.S. official of National Drug Control Policy permanent authority to withhold over $3 million that the US is supposed to pay for WADA each year. I think overall it shows that the US is trying to use the legal jurisdiction, the funding cuts-off efforts, and also the media propaganda to push unilateral sports hegemony and turn this anti-doping issue into a political tool, as you just mentioned. So this is very worrisome for not only Chinese athletes, but also it should be worrisome for athletes who has the potential to beat US teams, because it's clearly is an unfair competition.
Sounds like very strategic steps taken by the United States. Apart from increased number of doping tests, what other impacts has the alleged doping scandal had on Chinese athletes?
Because I pay attention to not only the swimming competition, but also others. So you can see Chinese athletes at Paris Olympic Games have been handling this very well, I would say, most of the time. If we take Pan Zhanle, for example, he said even though he went through 50 doping tests, 29 from last year, 21 times this year, including the times in Paris, all of these tests came back negative. So despite the rigorous testing, he said it's no big deal. He said he could handle it and it was unaffected to him. And he still won the gold medals. So I think not only for him, but also for Zhang Yufei, she said they're willing to cooperate with the doping tests. They're just hoping that they're not coming, knocking on their doors as early as 6 or 7 a.m. in the morning, because it will somehow affect their, daily routine. Still, even though Chinese athletes, they were performing well, facing this unfair testing and pressure, it doesn't mean this is the correct way they should be treated.
Right.
Yeah, for example, I saw this, you probably have heard his name, Brad Hockey. He's the former competitive swimmer who represented Australia at the 2000 Summer Olympics and 2004 Summer Olympics. And then he became a coach and later became a US citizen. He posted this video on social media and caused a lot of criticism. He said it's not humanly possible to beat. He said Pan Zhanle's world record, is not humanly possible to achieve. He said it's not humanly possible to beat that field by body length.
Okay.
Yeah, he said that's not real. You cannot beat that field against the Kyle Chalmers or David Popovich. You don't beat those guys by one full body length in 100 freestyle. So I think not only for me, but also for many fans or many people on social media like X, they said that Hockey's remarks is a window into the mind collapse of many in the West. They probably think, why is it possible if the athlete is from the US or from Australia? Why is it not possible when a Chinese athlete achieved this remarkable record? So they call it racism. We don't see the Western mainstream media pointing out that narrative, right? Because when we are Googling it, they're not celebrating for Chinese teams winning the gold medal. Instead, you will see words like scandal or doping related to Chinese team, which is not fair. And on top of that, the Western mainstream media did not report what WADA's chief said. He said that 90% of U.S. athletes did not compete under WADA's World Anti-Doping Code, and that's totally double standards.
All right. But as the Chinese swimmers are being attacked and they have competed under the shadow of suspicion, it's quite interesting because the Chinese audiences have posed their doubt against the U.S. swimmers. And they called them purple sweet potatoes because some of their faces looked abnormally purple or blue after they touched the wall. But is there a relation between the purple faces and doping?
Well, that's a good question, I have to say. I can only speak from my observation because I'm not a scientist or a physician. So as you said, some of the U.S. swimmers had drawn attention from their abnormally purple faces after the races, which led to widespread suspicion that the U.S. swimmers had been under the effect of certain drugs. So what's even more suspicious is that when the U.S. Embassy in China posted the picture to congratulate U.S. swimming team on their achievements at the Olympics, they adjust the athletes' face color from purple to regular.
All right.
Yeah, making athletes' purple face look very normal. I mean, people would ask if the U.S. athletes were clean, if they are not using illegal drugs, why would U.S. Embassy made adjustment on those pictures, right? And netizens were asking, isn't that an attempt to cover something? So it just makes us curious. What's the truth behind this move? From a scientific perspective, we hear people from National Health Commission said that during high intensity sports like swimming, the body's demand for oxygen increases dramatically. And if athletes cannot digest oxygen in time, it can lead to tissue hypoxia, resulting in a purple face. So this condition is usually temporary and can quickly be resolved once the athletes rest and adjust their breathing. But we saw American swimming team, their swimmers remained purple even during the awards ceremony. So what's really going on? I think so only the American teams and also maybe WADA later on, they can do something to find out what's really happening. I believe if Chinese athletes have to go through such strict anti-doping tests, so should the U.S. team.
There have been reports of U.S. athletes who got positive results from the doping tests finally made it to the Olympics. How did they manage to do that?
That's another upsetting part. Like people were saying that there might be the misuse of therapeutic use exemptions, or in short, TUE, and also the high ratio of exemptions for certain medications by the U.S. athletes. Because let me explain what's TUE for very quickly. So according to WADA's official website, therapeutic use exemptions allows athletes to receive treatment for medical conditions, even if that treatment involves a prohibited substance or methods without the threat of sanctions. So they're okay to use it as long as they fill out a form. I mean, that's a very standard practice. However, to protect athletes' privacy, their applications are not made public, which means we don't know who are using drugs for treatment or who are not. Unfortunately, that opens the door for many athletes to legally use performance-enhancing drugs under their doctor's supervision. And if we look at the data, in 2016, a hacker called Magic Bear breached into WADA's database and discovered that in 2015 alone, 653 American athletes applied for immunity. And with over 400 requests were granted, that means the approving rate of American athletes legally using drugs during the competition was over 60%.
60%.
Yeah. And in comparison, despite having similar number of athletes, only 54 Russian athletes applied for immunity, but only about 37% approval rate. And in China's case, Chinese athletes with only a single-digit number receiving exemptions. So we can see that the U.S. leads the world in both the number of approved therapeutic use exemptions and also a duration of extensions that are granted. And that's the reason why the U.S. swimming team is known as the asthma team and the U.S. gymnastic team is known as the ADHD team.
That's also probably why people are more skeptical towards the U.S. team. Then what did the U.S. do with their own athletes tested positive for doping?
Well, they would turn a blind eye on it, to be honest. Because if we look at this example of the U.S. sprinting star Ariane Knighton, he tested positive for banned steroids earlier this year, but the U.S. anti-doping agency decided before the start of the domestic qualifiers for the Paris Olympics that Knighton wouldn't face any ineligibility. And people on social media were asking why U.S. athletes could avoid ban after failed drug test. So the other case is Calista Liu. She is a Korean American and one of the U.S. women's artistic swimmers who won the silver medal at the Paris Olympics this year. She tested positive for doping before the match, but she claimed it was due to her dad's eye drops. The U.S. did not take any action, and any feedback or ban or reported to WADA or anything. But for Chinese swimmers, they asked the FBI to to launch an investigation on them. So, I mean, if that's not double standards, I don't know what is.
Okay, but this is not the first time that the U.S. handled their doping issues with leniency, is it?
Clearly not, because I'm not sure if you have watched this interview by a French sports physician. He said that in the last century, the U.S. invented anabolic steroids. And in American training center, there were large bowls in the locker room filled with different color pills, and athletes would take a handful of them before they go compete. And the reason Americans dominant in throwing events and track and field is that many of them were using anabolic steroids. So a good example would be in 1988, Carl Lewis. He tested positive 3 times before the Seoul Olympics, but he was not punished or sanctioned by the U.S. anti-doping agency. So the American has the history of covering up the similar incidents.
So the therapeutic use exemptions, they were created to level the playing field, but somebody just used it to gain unfair advantages, which brings us to the final and also a very important question. We know that Los Angeles is set to host the next Olympics. How can the next games be more fair when it comes to doping issues?
There are a few things that people were suggesting, at least the lessons we can learn from this Paris Olympic Games. First is that strengthen anti-doping protocols. So maybe we should implement more rigorous and transparent anti-doping regulations, including advanced testing methods and stricter penalties for violations. And secondly, I think we should support independent oversight and also support efforts of WADA. WADA has the authority to oversight the Olympic Games, but because of some external forces, we're questioning WADA's work. So we should encourage independent oversight bodies to review and audit anti-doping measures and investigations to ensure they are carried out fairly and without bias. And also, I think it's important to ensure fair testing because either it's WADA, International Testing Agency, or WA, the World Aquatics, they should apply uniform testing standards across all participating nations and ensure that testing procedures are equally rigorous for all athletes, not only targeting Chinese athletes, not only targeting any other country's athletes, but every nation. All nations' athletes should be treated equally. And lastly, I think, and also is most importantly, we should address the political interference issues in the Olympic Games. We should fight against the political influences or biases that could affect anti-doping efforts, like what the U.S. has done in the past game, and ensure that decisions and investigations are based solely on evidence and fair practices.
Very well said, and we also hope that the games will be played under the sunlight instead of the gray zone. Thank you very much for joining us, Yawen.
It's my pleasure.
Amid the shadow of doping allegations, Chinese swimmers made history in Paris, shattering the U.S.'s 40-year dominance in the men's 4x100 meters medley and setting a new world record in the men's 100-meter freestyle, despite facing far more testing than their U.S. counterparts. The fight against doping is crucial for maintaining the integrity of sports, but as these accusations swirl, we must ask, what's really at play here? And that brings us to the end of this episode of Deep Dive. If you enjoyed what you just heard, don't forget to follow us on your podcast platforms. Just search for Deep Dive. You can also leave a comment to let us know what you want to learn about China and beyond. This episode is brought to you by me, Do Hongyu, and my colleague Zhang Zhang. Special thanks to CGTN Radio reporter Xu Yawen. We'll see you in the next one.